So what happens on September 11th for you?
Yeah.
You were active in a squadron, getting ready for work in the morning.
Totally.
Boom.
I'm stationed right up the road here. 5 miles north of here is Marine Corps Station Miramar. I'm on my second half of my first tour as a pilot in the F-18 squadron. I'd already done that one deployment, and I had a routine down. I was getting up. I guess it was probably 5 in the morning. I'm sitting at the foot of my bed, lacing up my boots like I did every day to just get in the car and drive into work and click on the TV. And, I see it's 8 o'clock back east or around that time, and I see what's going on. And I think, same story for all of us, kind of piece it together very quickly. Like, hey, this isn't an accident. Something's really happening here. You see the second building. And it very quickly kind of clicks in like, this is the real thing. And I knew something. I knew we were going to go to war. I didn't know what. I obviously didn't know the details, but I knew things were going to change really dramatically. As a matter of fact, my drive to work, which normally would have taken me 10 minutes or whatever, 15 minutes, some short drive to get up into the base. It was like 3 hours to get on the base. They're inspecting every vehicle. Every car is getting pulled over. Dogs are, the whole 9 yards. Just the security. It was pretty chaotic. It was kind of mayhem. And I drive into my squadron, and half of my squadron had already, not half, but a good number of guys had already been up to Fallon, which was where we're going to go for training, the same place that Top Gun is. And it was just part of our normal training cycle. And my squadron commander at the time, an awesome guy, called me because he had gone up there, and I was supposed to bring be part of the second half that went up there. He's like, hey, man, you need to go brief. You're going to be the lead of a 4-ship of aircraft. We don't know all the details yet, but they're going to call you. They're going to find live ordnance, and you're going to have to fly a mission, an air patrol, combat air patrol mission. We called it a CAP, because there were still a bunch of airliners that were still airborne coming in from places like Japan and Korea, these long-haul, 12, 13, 14-hour flights. There's a whole bunch of airplanes airborne, and we didn't know if there's a potential issue with those airplanes, if they're going to try to do the same thing back east that they did out west. Total chaos. And I had just recently graduated from Top Gun, so he's like, hey, you're the lead, and we didn't know what the mission was. I mean, it was basically one of those things where we're supposed to get airborne, and somehow between us and some other controller, we're going to kind of determine if a particular aircraft might have been a threat. And that was happening all over the country. People were in their aircraft, Air Force, Navy, Marine pilots were just launching to do these protection missions of what ended up becoming something called Operation Noble Eagle, which started on September 11th, and it was this aviation overwatch of key cities and key locations, and we were totally clueless on what that was. Now, I ended up not launching. It didn't happen, but we did the brief. We were getting ready to go, and it was just kind of that moment of chaos of we were on our heels, and Top Gun didn't prepare me for that. I didn't have a sense of what I was supposed to do with an airliner, filled with civilians on some route coming from Japan, and trying to figure out what I would do if somebody said, hey, that aircraft, we've figured out that aircraft is going to try to fly into a building or crash into an airport or something like that. It was just kind of mayhem, and it was, it was tough to start off.
The idea being that if that is suspected of happening, or they can somehow confirm that's going to happen, then you or one of your mates is going to have to shoot down a civilian aircraft. That's what That's what they're thinking.
Yeah, exactly. And that was something I'd never considered.
I don't think anybody had considered that at that point.
And I've read there's some pilots that actually ended up launching out in the East Coast. I've read a couple articles of pilots that took off in their F-16s here in D.C. because obviously it was with the Pentagon. Up in D.C. and then New York City that actually did get airborne, and they had missions to do exactly that. So in some sense, I was pretty lucky that I didn't have to go through that calculus, but I still can picture where I'm sitting, given that brief with 3 other pilots, kind of like we're sitting today. And we're even asking ourselves, like, well, how do you shoot down an airliner? What would we actually go through to do it? How would we determine, when we were trying to talk through that, and the idea that an airliner filled with civilians, and we knew, at that point that those other airliners were just regular commercial airplanes that just took off to go on their flight, and they had crashed. We knew everybody on board, nobody's going to survive that. And so it was just a very strange way to start what ended up being kind of a cycle of war that, we've all been through for years now. On that morning of getting that call from the CO, hey, this is what you're doing. And, that was the beginning. Very shortly after that, within a date or two, no, actually, I think probably that late afternoon, and certainly by the next day, my squadron was one of the several squadrons that was tasked to go back out on the carrier. So we split the squadron in half. That same CO that called me, he took guys from Fallon, flew onto the ship, onto the carrier, right off the coast of LAX. And I still, we talked about this. I can picture to this day, I took off out of San Diego and was flying overhead Los Angeles International Airport, and we had guys that taken off from the carrier. They had live missiles, and they were doing a cap, and I'm flying, kind of opposite direction overhead LAX, looking down, and I grew up in Southern California. LAX is like one of the busiest airports in the world. There's planes all over the tarmac, on the runways, on the taxiways, because everybody landed, nobody took off. There's no controllers, and they're doing this cap mission where they're just flying overhead LAX, kind of largely unknown on what's going on, and just that moment of surreality of I'm airborne and there's nobody else flying, and we're just sort of just waiting for something to happen. And it was kind of one of those, hey, you'll get more specific instructions as we figure it out. The leadership was scrambling every bit as much as we were, and kind of looking down, thinking this is a whole new world. This is not Southern Watch. That mission we've been doing, and within maybe 6 weeks, we steamed out. We loaded the carrier a couple months early, put the squadron, the whole air wing, got on board the carrier, and steamed out towards the North Arabian Gulf to go do what we called as Operation Enduring Freedom.